for the sun, not because a trumpet sounds, but because the cold has found its way through your blanket again. The ground beneath you is hard and uneven, packed down by hundreds of other bodies that slept here before you. The thin fabric of your coat does little to hold in warmth, and your breath drifts upward in faint white clouds. Around you, the camp is quiet but not peaceful, flooded instead with the soft sounds of coughing, shifting feet, and distant murmurs. You lie still for a moment, listening, letting the early morning settle around you. There is no hurry because there is rarely anything urgent to be done. Most days start this way, in slow fashion, without the blessings of a ritual. This is how being a soldier often feels. Life is measured not in battles but in mornings like this. You have learned that waiting is the most dependable part of your routine. As you sit up, the smell of damp earth rises around you, mixed with smoke from fires that never quite go out. Your boots, placed beside you the night before, are stiff and misshapen, worn thin at the soles. When you pull them on, they scrape against sore skin that has not healed properly in weeks. Nearby, another soldier does the same in silence, moving carefully to avoid drawing attention to his discomfort. No one complains loudly anymore because everyone feels the same aches. Hunger sits low and constant in your stomach, familiar enough that it no longer surprises you. You adjust your coat and stand, feeling the weight of your gear settle into place. It is not heavy, but it is always there, pressing into your shoulders. This quiet discomfort sets the tone for the day ahead. Camp itself stretches out in loose lines, tents and makeshift shelters scattered about the ground in a muddy squelch. Some men sleep under canvas, others under scraps of cloth or nothing at all. Fires burn low, tended carefully so they last as long as possible. There is no sense of neat order, only the practicality of survival. You step with care to avoid puddles which never seem to dry, even in the best of weather. The earth has been trampled down into a thick, sticky surface clinging to whatever it touches. Every step takes another layer on your boots and trousers until you stop noticing the weight of it. Camp is not a temporary place anymore, permanent in its own uneasy way. Most of the day will pass without much happening at all. Orders, if they come, arrive slowly and often change by evening. You may be told to stand in formation only to be dismissed again an hour later. Drills are repetitive and unremarkable, performed more to maintain habit than readiness. The movements are familiar enough that your body carries them out without much thought. As you stand in line, your mind wanders, drifting between memories of home and the dull present moment. Time stretches and folds in on itself, marked only by hunger and fatigue. You learn that patience is as important as strength in this. Or endurance matters more than action. Food comes at irregular intervals, rarely enough to be satisfying. When rations are issued, little ceremony or interest is shown. A chunk of hard bread, perhaps some salted meat, and a thin broth, if your fortune is good, make up the bulk of your meals. You eat slowly, not for the taste, but to make it last. The bread is tough and dry, scraping slightly against your teeth when you chew. The meat, when it is issued, is salty enough to make you thirstier than you were before. The water is precious and not always clean, being drawn from nearby streams serving the needs of the entire camp. You drink anyway because there is no alternative. Hunger becomes a background presence, never quite going away, acting always as a quiet reminder of its presence. Sickness passes through the camp far more effectively than any messenger. Coughs echo softly across the tents in the mornings and evenings, especially. Fevers come and go, sometimes lasting days, sometimes never to leave at all. You see men grow weaker, not from wounds, but because of exhaustion and sickness. Medical care exists, but limited and often uneven, dependent on supplies mostly lacking. Treatments are simple and often ineffective, offered in calm resignation rather than confidence. You try not to think about it too much, paying more interest to simple comforts, warmth from a fire, a moment of rest, or a quiet conversation. Health feels fragile here, something easily lost and rarely restored. Boredom sets in as deeply as the cold. Hours pass and there is nothing to do with your hands or mind. Some mend little bits of wood, others mend clothes that will soon tear again. Conversations meander and die, repeating the same subjects time after time. News from home, rumors of movement, guesses about when the war might end all, these circulate quietly. You listen more than you speak, conserving energy and attention. The mind learns to slow down, matching the pace of camp life. Silence becomes a friend, comforting in its predictability. On these long stretches, the war feels very distant and abstract. Yet under it all, there is a constant undertone of fear. You know how this stagnation at any moment can turn to urgency and confusion. Drills are to get you ready for what may or may not happen. As night falls, the camp sounds different, sharper, more alert. The guards move around in the dark, their steps sure and unhurried. You lie awake sometimes and listen for sounds. That something is wrong. Most nights, nothing disturbing happens. But the possibility never completely disappears. Fear here is inane and patient. It waits with you. Clothing provides little insulation against the elements. Uniforms, when they exist at all, are mismatched and worn. Fabric thins at the elbows and knees, fraying under constant use. You layer what you can, adding shirts or scraps beneath your coat. Rain seeps through everything, leaving you damp for hours or days afterward. Dry clothes are a luxury seldom known. The feel of wet fabric against your skin becomes normal. With time, comfort is redefined, boiled down to a lack of extreme discomfort. Warm and dry are ideals rather than something one expects. As night approaches, the camp takes on another sluggish transition. The fires glow brighter against the night sky, their light dancing across tired faces. Supper, if it comes at all, is brief and unremarkable. You eat, drink sparingly, and prepare for another night on the ground. Conversations grow quieter, replaced by long stretches of silence. You arrange your blanket carefully, knowing it will not block the cold completely. The day has passed without drama, as was the day before it. This repetition shapes your experience more than any single event. Lying down again, you feel the accumulated weight of fatigue press gently but firmly into your body. Muscles ache not from battle, but from standing, waiting, and existing in constant tension. Sleep comes unevenly, interrupted by noise, cold, or wandering thoughts. You think briefly of home, of warmth, of familiar routines. Those thoughts drift away as exhaustion takes hold. Tomorrow will likely unfold the same way quietly and without distinction. This is what it is really like to be a soldier most of the time. The war for you is a long lesson in waiting. Morning comes without ceremony, signaled only by a gradual lightening of the sky above the camp. You open your eyes slowly, feeling stiffness set in before you've even stirred. The ground has siphoned all warmth from your body through the course of the night, leaving you cold and unmotivated to rise. Around you, others begin the same cautious process, every motion guarded and unobtrusive. There is no perceived urgency, for nothing really here requires speed. You sit up and stretch as best you can, tuning into the soft stir of blankets and coats. Another day has dawned, identical to the last. This sameness becomes a strange source of comfort. Predictability, even when unpleasant, offers stability. Once on your feet, you take a moment to orient yourself, glancing across the camp as it stirs into life. Smoke lifts lazily from small fires as men cajole dying embers back to flame. The smell of wood smoke mingles with damp fabric and unwashed bodies. It is not overwhelming but constant, seeping into everything you possess. You tug at your coat again, ever fidgeting, seeking out that fraction more of heat. Your hands are chafed and dry, skin cracked from the cold and from constant use. Small hurts take a long time to heal, some never doing so. This isn't tortured misery but subdued wear. Your body hardens over time to harbor it. Drills, when they occur, are conscious and unhurried. You fall in with others, shoulder to shoulder, your boots depressing slightly into the spongy earth. Commands are clearly vocalized, but without flair, repeated until it is recognized by all. Movements are repeated and again repeated, not for perfection, but to become known. You raise your musket, lower it, pivot in step, all at a steady cadence. There is little yelling and no sense of abandon. point is routine, not exhortation. Your arms ache, but you make no remark. Fatigue here is anticipated, not noted. Between drills, long stretches of time open up with nothing to fill them. You sit on a log or a crate, resting your feet and watching the camp. Conversations drift by in fragments, rarely forming complete stories. Someone mentions a rumor about supplies arriving soon and someone else doubts it quietly. You listen without response, having learned not to invest too much hope. Hope, when raised too often, becomes exhausting. Instead, you focus on the present moment, the warmth of the fire, the solid ground beneath you. This narrowing of attention helps the time to pass. It is a skill learned out of necessity. Food, when it arrives later in the day, is greeted with calm acceptance. You take what you are given and find a place to sit. Eating is a slow process, not out of enjoyment, but practicality. Each bite is chewed thoroughly, partly to ease digestion, partly to make the meal last longer. You are aware of every texture, every taste, because there are so few of them. Meals do not bring satisfaction, only temporary relief. Hunger retreats slightly, then waits patiently to return. You wipe your hands on your trousers and stand again. The cycle continues without pause. Meetings could be held, letters written, and logistics coordinated more effectively. Their environment became a means with which to sustain the Army's functional ability. Hierarchy reinforced these advantages without creating overt spectacle. Quiet differences between officer and soldier formed a microcosm of society within the Army. It was here that leadership and comfort were inseparable. The presence of officers also influenced morale and efficiency indirectly. Visible organization, better conditions, and calm decision-making reassured soldiers. Even when direct contact was minimal, the hierarchy created order and predictability. Soldiers recognized that rank provided not only privilege but also oversight. Camps remained functional because officers coordinated resources and maintained standards. The subtle comforts officers enjoyed had far-reaching effects on the Army's endurance. Power and hierarchy functioned together as stabilizing forces. Daily life for officers was thus both easier and more consequential than for enlisted men. Comfort, though limited, reinforced responsibility. By the end of the segment, the quiet contrast is clear. Whereas soldiers had to bear cold, hunger, and long hours of labor, officers had softer versions of the same conditions. Power, hierarchy, and comfort existed together, shaped experiences without dramatizing them. Privilege did not take away responsibility, nor did it take away the requirement for patience and endurance. It is in observing these differences that one completes the immersion into life in the Revolutionary War. We learn about the Army as a community shaped by rank and circumstance. Each day, from the cold morning to the tired evening, was a reflection of a balance between authority and hardship. Leadership, hierarchy, and comfort coexisted silently, preserving structure, order, and survival within the Continental Army. As we leave behind this world of the Revolutionary War, it is worth pausing to consider the lives observed. Soldiers with quiet resilience faced cold, hunger, and uncertainty. Officers faced softened versions of these hardships cushioned by rank and privilege. In every case, however, survival rested on patience, endurance, and the careful attention to detail. The daily routines, the small rituals, and the consistent labors of men on both sides of rank constituted the true backbone of the Army. Every object, every letter, every simple act speaks of a story of human persistence. Lives went on through the mud and fatigue and waiting, developed by circumstance and necessity. The rhythm of their days, seen slowly, reflects a world ruled by endurance and not drama. This, in fact, is reality below the varnish of battles and heroism. It is in the little things so easily looked over: worn shoes, buttons mended time and time again, musket balls passed hand to hand for practice, not for battle. It is in these fragments, though, that archaeology unearths patience, quiet labor. Meals functioned. Tents were set up with care, and personal things were held dear for comfort. Leadership was manifested in careful management and correspondent thoughtfulness. Observing calmly, decisions were deliberate and restrained. Progress was not in victories, but in preservation. The soldiers and officers alike moved through the long days governed by routine, structure, and survival. Each of the small efforts was piling into endurance, developing the ways the army could continue year after uncertainty year. Past whispers through these objects, encouraging reflection rather than excitement. Leadership itself, as exemplified by the life of George Washington, was not a radiant, heroic figure, but measured, calm, and persistent. The quiet work of logistics, planning, and observation mattered far more than those brief, shining moments of battle. Officers' privileges bought them time to think, while hierarchy provided for stability and efficiency. Comfort and hardship in juxtaposition bring into view social structures that endured even in revolutionary times. This was not oppression, but a means to stability, guidance, and the ground on which ordinary soldiers could survive. In this way, patience, endurance, and careful management come out as the real agents of survival. History viewed from this angle is a record of persistence by human beings, small decisions, and quiet adjustment. These lives reflect the subtle rhythms of history, the monotony of camp life, careful attention to supply, endurance by ordinary soldiers and officers alike. The larger course of events in the Revolutionary War was won not only through heroic charges, but through thousands of persons making their way through hardship, scarcity, and discomfort. Each day was a microcosm of planning, waiting, cautious action, and understanding these details. We see history not as dramatic spectacles, but as a continuum of human experience. The ordinary is extraordinary when observed with calm attention, endurance, patience, and subtle leadership emerge as abiding themes that offer another kind of lesson. As we close this journey, let the imagination of the soldiers resting after a long day, the officers riding by firelight, and the quiet campsites waiting for morning be with us. Life went on through small acts of survival, persistently well measured and long sustained. Every tent, tool, and fragment speaks softly about the resilience of man. These are the rhythms of lives that persisted quietly under harsh conditions. It is in hardship that man would adapt, organize, and endure. The war was lived not only in battles, but also in the daily persistence of its participants. Their endurance shaped history as much as any victory or defeat. We listen quietly to their stories and honor the slow, patient work that sustained them. Let our minds now rest, carried into calm by the measured rhythms of the past. Eating was a moment to reflect rather than a time to rush. This difference contributed to the disparities in morale across ranks. Food reinforced hierarchy without formality. Comfort followed authority. Clothing also showed social differentiation within the army when possible. Officers wore fitted coats and cleaner clothes. Their uniforms suggested command through imagery. When worn, they retained shape and definition. Enlisted men's clothing was frequently mismatched and very patched. Officers had more possibilities of replacement or repair. Appearance mirrored power in more insidious ways. A well-maintained uniform created trust. It was these little visual signs that mattered in daily life. Clothing depicted rank without words. Comfort followed the display. Hierarchy also defined who knew what and when. Officers were informed directly and more regularly, which provided some solace amidst uncertainty. Comprehension of a plan minimized apprehension towards the future. News often reached enlisted soldiers secondhand. This difference produced a difference in perception. Officers could mentally prepare for changes that were impending. Knowledge brought about an element of alleviation. Authority existed in part because of insight. Leaders used the right of prescience. Knowledge fell as another silent prerequisite. Despite these differences, however, officers were not removed from hardship. Responsibility added its own burden. Decisions affected lives and outcomes, and officers carried the constant awareness of consequence. This mental weight shaped their experience of comfort, even in better shelter. Sleep was often light as authority required vigilance rather than ease. Comfort was balanced by accountability. Leadership demanded emotional restraint. Power did not remove worry, it merely redirected it. Hierarchy shaped hardship rather than eliminating it. Social conventions extended even into camp life. Whenever possible, officers dined together. Conversations were as good as the shared background and education of those who had them. Such gatherings underscored class identity. Polite manners and formality also remained significant. Good manners provided familiarity in a world turned upside down. Enlisted men tended to live more communally without distinction. Officers privileged privacy and decorum. Social hierarchy pervaded life even when revolutionary ideals were at their most ardent, where equality was a principle at best rather than a reality. Ideology did not kill hierarchy. The presence of servants or helpers underlined the difference. Even more, some officers kept personal servants for themselves. They would undertake responsibilities such as cooking and cleaning. This alleviated daily pressure. Enlisted soldiers had to do these tasks on their own. This visible difference contributed to upholding authority. Small conveniences greatly conditioned the experience. In this way, it became possible for officers to take care only of the command. Multiplying comfort by means of delegation was possible. Hierarchy expressed itself in the distribution of labor. Power organized the daily lives of people. Yet officers were supposed to display ignorance publicly. Complaints were muted or private. Leadership demanded composure whatever the condition. This premise framed how comfort was rendered, even when better sheltered. Officers minimized indulgence. Excess could undermine authority. Restraint preserved respect. Comfort existed quietly, openly celebrated. Power needed a balance between privilege and example. Authority rested on perception. Hierarchy needed discipline at all levels. As the war progressed, these distinctions became normalized. Soldiers knew where they stood in the hierarchy. Therein lay some sort of stability in times of uncertainty. Each rank had its own set of expectations from its members. Comforts were assigned in keeping with rank and responsibilities rather than an equality chart. Power efficiently structured survival. The army functioned through accepted imbalances. This could also allow for longevity through time. Class was not erased by revolution. It was merely adapted. It drew heavily from familiar systems of leadership. Change barely touched the order underneath. In the quiet rhythm of camp life, hierarchy became part of the background. Officers moved through space differently, spoke differently, lived differently. These contrasts went largely unchallenged in the open. They were understood as necessary to function. Comfort softened hardness where responsibility increased. Power stabilized the system during prolonging strain. Survival depended on structure as much as sacrifice. The army endured through managed inequality. Hierarchy carried both burden and benefit. It is within this balance that the war would continue, and within this quiet order that endurance took shape. The difference between the officers and the enlisted men of the Continental Army was striking yet subtle. There were advantages to being an officer, starting with a nicer cloth, sometimes made from finer wool or trimmed with brass buttons, which provided warmth and durability that most soldiers lacked. Tents were larger and better, situated away from the muddiest parts of the camp. They had access to higher quality food, such as salted meat and fresh bread, if available, or even imported goods on occasion. By today's standards, these are not lavish provisions, but compared to what ordinary soldiers had, they were significant. Carefully managed stores, their tents became the hub for planning and correspondence. As far from luxurious as the conditions were, their lives were shaped by responsibility cushioned against some of the harshness of a day-to-day military routine. The natural outcome of such great disparity in living standards was a reinforcement of the hierarchy, absent a necessary overt distinction among its men. Much of the experience of officers was determined by hierarchy. Rank decided who got to place their tents where, who received supplies first, and who could give duties to others. Orders flowed down through that structure, but there was substantial reliance from the upper ranks on enlisted men in practical execution. Most often, various aspects of camp life fell to the lot of the officers, logistics, drills, and discipline. While they were saved from the worst of the physical hardships, they carried the heavy load of decision-making. Mistakes or delays reflected immediately on them. The ability to shape morale, keep order, and manage routines rested directly in their hands. This combination of power and responsibility created a life simultaneously easier and more stressful than that of ordinary soldiers. Comfort came with obligations, and privilege was balanced by accountability. Food and clothes were only part of the manifestation of this hierarchy. Officers often had servants or orderlies to ease their chores, be it carrying supplies, preparing meals, or managing tents. These were usually soldiers tasked for a short period to relieve higher-ranking officers of some burdens. With the presence of helpers, officers could focus on planning and strategic tasks and leave the day-to-day struggle for survival to others. This subtle act of delegation brings into focus a system where social class existed even in revolution. It was not intended to make someone happy by creating inequality, but to make sure that men were ready and able to fight at all times. Officers also had more resources and thus better means of sending letters and keeping correspondence rather regularly compared to regular soldiers. Being able to write, plan, and rest turned into an act of silent power. Hierarchy and rank extended into leisure and social interaction. While soldiers drilled or repaired equipment, officers could spend time writing, reading, or discussing strategy, better bedding, private fire. All of these small comforts enhanced rest and health. Even such limited luxury permitted officers to maintain focus during campaigns that were not only very long but also challenging. Really was the difference supposed to insult the enlisted men, yet the difference was there. Officers learned quickly how to handle this privilege judiciously, recognizing that morale rested as much on perception as it did on provision. Respect had to be earned rather than simply assumed. Power and comfort remained hand in glove as hierarchy shaded every part of daily life. The quiet contrast tended to underscore the structure that kept order within the army. Despite relative comfort, officers still endured the challenges of war, winter, poor roads, and scarcity affected everyone. Officers' tents could be damp, food limited, and fatigue unavoidable. Not even they were able to avoid illness and stress. Leading required the physical and mental stamina of all, even when material hardship was reduced. Their privilege mitigated some discomfort but could not eliminate responsibility. Decisions made by officers had consequences for hundreds of soldiers. Mistakes could result in lost supplies, wounded morale, or worse. Comfort was relative, yet it existed alongside immense responsibility. This balance defined the officer's experience in a war defined by endurance and patience. Hierarchy influenced interactions between officers and enlisted men, too. There was respect and obedience, but there was the development of personal relationships across class boundaries. Officers shared knowledge, advice, and encouragement. Mentoring and training gave subtle advantages to the regular soldiers. Ability and fairness were appreciated, reinforcing loyalty among the soldiers. Nevertheless, rank was often an unseen obstacle that differentiated opportunities and authority. Officers had the influence on the pace of labor, the quality of training, and the way resources were meted out. It was in these decisions that survival and well-being lay. Power was exercised quietly as mismanagement would ripple throughout the camp. This subtle interplay of authority and support, therefore, characterized the social dynamic of the army. Luxury, though limited, was magnified by context. A warm coat, a stable tent, or extra rations provided not indulgence but stability. Officers could plan and act with fewer immediate distractions than their men. These small advantages allowed strategic thinking to blossom. Such contact patterned cohesion in the leadership strata. Social ease consolidated cohesion. Gentility continued even under privation. Cultures softened the harsh lines of war. Despite these privileges, officers were not free from stress either. A sense of responsibility weighed heavy upon a day-to-day decision one had to make. Failure was blasphemy and carried serious consequences. Officers were responsible for other people's lives. Comfort did not drive out apprehension. It was a rare thing to get a good night's sleep with even better shelter. Letters from home often brought news that could be either a distraction or a worry of some kind. To lead, one had to keep emotions in check. Officers quietly absorbed the pressure put on them during such times. Their stamina was mental rather than physical. Privilege did not relieve burden but changed its form. The division between officers and enlisted men was not only stark but normalized. Soldiers expected hierarchy as part of military life. Differences in provisions and shelter were thus accepted rather than resented. Structure provided predictability. Washington understood the delicate balance required to keep this all working. There needed to be visible distinction with authority. Too much equality risked disorder. Too much distance risked resentment. Leadership walked a careful line. Comfort was controlled, not excessive. The social order remained intact. The Army functioned through balance. Archaeological evidence supports these contrasts clearly. Finer objects and fewer signs of repair in officer quarters, better materials in greater quantity. Personal items indicating leisure and privacy. Heavier wear and improvisation in enlisted areas. These findings align with written records. The ground preserves social distinction without judgment. Objects reflect routine rather than ideology. Archaeology confirms lived experience quietly. Leadership left material traces. Comfort shaped survival differently across ranks. As this section settles, the difference becomes subtle, not extreme. Officers had a better life, but not necessarily an easy one. Convenience helped officers sustain themselves for long and enduring leadership. Houses, food, and clothes granted stability to that authority. These privileges were assumed but not concealed. Social classes remained vital for order. Class division did not disappear after the revolution. It transformed the meaning, not the realities of everyday existence. Tradition held leadership and gave to different meanings to survival. The Army functioned based on regulated inequality, and in this silent equilibrium, persistence survived. Although the revolution spoke the language of equality, life within the Army still reflected older aspects of social differentiation. Rank often followed from background rather than solely merit. Officers more often came from wealthier families or established social circles. There were huge values placed on education, connections, and reputation. Enlisted men recognized such differences even if they rarely voiced opinions about them openly. For them, the Army could not afford without hierarchy. In many ways, equality remained less reality but rather an ideal. Social class supplied expectations and behavior. Leadership was identified with refinement as much as authority. Overnight, the revolution did not undo class. Officers were also expected to present themselves differently from common soldiers. They spoke more formally and with confidence. It was reflected in their clothes through better material and tailoring. Even their worn uniforms looked more orderly. Many officers also managed to attend to personal grooming routines when possible. These habits reinforced authority and respect. The enlisted man observed such differences silently. Contrast was understood as normal, not something to be challenged. Class distinctions were understood in this unfamiliar war. Daily life reinforced hierarchy without explanation. Living arrangements within camps reflected social rank rather clearly. Officers typically slept in separated tents or quarters. These spaces were less crowded and better protected from the weather. Privacy granted rest and reflection that was not often available to the common soldier. Officers could write letters or plan without constant interruption. Enlisted men slept in shared conditions, little separated. These differences shaped daily experience deeply. Comfort became another marker of rank. Leadership was reinforced through environment as well as command. Social class influenced even where one slept. Food further highlighted class differences. Officers often supplemented rations with private purchases or supplies from home when possible. Their meals included many more varieties. Shared messes among officers created small social circles. Conversation and planning occurred over meals. Enlisted soldiers ate simpler, more repetitive food. Hunger affected all, but officers often faced it less severely. These differences were not always intentional. Access naturally shaped outcomes. Social position influenced nourishment. For this reason, daily life simply reflected unequal distribution of this and many other things. Financial resources also served to separate officers from enlisted men. Many officers had personal funds upon which to draw. Delayed pay was an inconvenience, even annoying rather than devastating. Enlisted soldiers depended more fully on wages. Financial insecurity was a stress addition to their service. Officers could purchase small comforts. These items worked quietly to improve morale. Economic stability was a shaper of perspective on hardship. Leadership benefited indirectly from wealth. Social class softened the war's impact unevenly. Education reinforced hierarchy. Officers could read and write with greater facility. The written orders and correspondence were given and received with comfort. Enlisted men relied more on verbal instruction. Written words set a boundary on access. Officers could participate directly in political ideas. Their understanding of revolution differed in tone. Such a gap influenced motivation and interpretation. Leadership spoke the language of ideology while soldiers lived the language of endurance. Class defined experience beyond the battlefield. Social expectations even in war followed the officer class. They were expected to behave with restraint and dignity at all times. Mistakes were forgiven differently across ranks. Discipline varied subtly depending on status. Officers corrected each other in private. Enlisted men more publicly. These practices reinforced authority gently but firmly. Social norms persisted beneath the veneer of revolutionary ideals. The army functioned within familiar patterns. Equality remained an ideal. Daily interactions preserved hierarchy. With such divisions, there was a continuing necessity for cooperation. Officers relied on soldiers for survival. Over time, the resentment brought about by mutual reliance began to soften. Shared hardship developed respect. Many officers came to appreciate the sacrifices of their men. Fair leadership sometimes transcended class. Consideration in small matters often meant a great deal. Over time, trust developed. Social class remained, but it was not dominated by hostility. Because of necessity, the army remained united. The need to endure required cooperation across rank. Washington himself personified this interplay between class and restraint. His background placed him squarely in the upper echelons, but he modeled restraint and shared sacrifice. He rejected the extremes of privilege and kept a disciplined demeanor. His behavior set a standard against which the behavior of other officers was considered. Leadership demanded sensitivity to privilege. Washington knew morale depended on it. He practiced fairness in his own way within the limitations. Social class did not disappear, but it was contained. Authority remained cool and level-headed. His example molded the tone of the army. Over time, the persistence of class shaped the post-war memory of service. More often, officers were remembered than enlisted men. Written records favored the ones who could write. Recognition followed rank naturally. Yet, archaeology and quiet accounts restore some balance. Visibility builds piece by piece into a view of daily soldier life. The revolution becomes complex through this lens. Equality appears as a process rather than a fact. The new social class endured with new ideals. History moved slowly just like the people who lived it. Change unfolded gradually. As this section comes to rest in its quiet moment of contemplation, contrasts soften and are no longer extreme. The army was uniform in sentiment yet divided by experience. Social class dictated comfort, safety, and voice. It was simply life. Revolution did not dissolve the structure overnight. It moved within the patterns preset. Officers and soldiers alike suffered, but not equally. but it was in endurance that they were as one, or moved in patience, not perfection. In this quiet understanding, the past rests once more. Power in the Continental Army was silent, instilled through rank and not brute force. It was an authority carried by officers that instituted daily routine without constant enforcement. Orders were issued calmly, usually followed without question. This hierarchy brought a sense of predictability to uncertain times. Everyone suffered under hardship, but not equally so. Officers lived closer to stability even when shortages hit. Their position provided them with more information and resources. The difference was seldom discussed openly, yet always understood. Authority softened discomforts without eliminating them. Power here worked like insulation, not escape. Comfort for officers often came in small but meaningful ways, sturdier shelters, sometimes utilizing houses instead of tents. When buildings were available, officers were assigned rooms first. These at least provided relief from weather and noise. Door they closed quietly meant a great deal on long nights. Officers could rest more fully between responsibilities. Better rest meant clearer decision-making. This comfort was practical, not indulgent. It supported leadership effectiveness. Hierarchy shaped living conditions directly. Food distribution also reflected rank and responsibility. Officers generally received more regular rations. Their foods were supplemented at times through personal means, personal funds, or connection with locals gave added security, whereas enlisted men would have to rely solely on issued supplies. Officers did have alternatives. Anxiety would reduce scarcity. The meals of officers were calmer and more predictable. Unlike dramatic mysteries, these discoveries do not point to sudden events. They reflect long periods of ordinary living. Campsites show signs of repeated use rather than chaos. Objects are worn, repaired, and reused. This suggests stability rather than disorder. Archaeologists notice how little changes over time. The same types of items appear again and again. This repetition confirms routine. Calm curiosity appreciates the sameness as meaningfulness. It reveals how soldiers adapted rather than reacted. Daily life unfolds without urgency. The lack of drama becomes informative. Time does its work in this quiet exploration. Weeks, months, or years may be represented by layers of soil. The differences from layer to layer are often subtle. A different type of button appears. There's a slight change in the location of a cooking pit. Such subtleties are important. Archaeologists compare them carefully, never rushing to conclusions. Through comparison, patterns emerge only gradually. Patient curiosity gives time a chance to do its work. Quick answers must be avoided. Rather, the circle of understanding grows slowly. This approach mirrors the measured pace of camp life. Passage of time becomes visible through patience. Objects are investigated not for what is unique about them, but for what is typical. A plain spoon can say more than an elaborately decorated one. Average things reflect common experience. It is for these reasons that the archaeologist treasures such finds. They speak of routines repeated daily. Calm curiosity is directed at what was normal, not at what was exceptional. Therein lies a lot of restraint. It falls in step with historical reality. Most soldiers had quiet, uneventful lives. It's the repetition that built their lives. This is what archaeology pays its respects to. Knowledge increases by observing the ordinary. Even uncertainty is handled delicately in this process. Not all objects can be identified with complete certainty. Sometimes the fragment remains ambiguous. Archaeologists accept this without frustration. They record possibilities rather than definitive answers. Calm curiosity allows coexistence of multiple meanings. This openness prevents the forcing of narratives. It respects the limits of evidence. The past does not have to be resolved for it to be meaningful. Uncertainty becomes part of the story. Soldiers themselves live under daily uncertainty. Archaeology reflects that sharing of experience. Not knowing becomes a historical truth. This is quietening too. of the tendency to impose modern expectations upon the past. Archaeologists resist projecting emotions or intentions without evidence. Broken object does not have to represent tragedy. It might just reflect wear. Calm curiosity guards against emotional conclusions. It would instead be targeted toward function and context. Objects understood within their practical use, restraint keeps interpretation anchored. It denies overstimulation to the imagination. The intent is to understand, not to be entertained. History is kept at a calm and measured level. It's an approach suited to the rhythm of everyday life. The lack of dramatic findings is in itself revealing. No great stores of treasure appear in campsites. No great signs of chaos dominate the ground. Instead, the landscape reflects maintenance and order. This supports written accounts of discipline and routine. Calm curiosity confirms rather than contradicts history. It reinforces the notion of ignorance over excitement. Soldiers live through long stretches of sameness. Archaeology reflects that experience faithfully. The quietness of the finds equates to the quietness of daily life. Understanding comes through alignment rather than through surprise. The past feels steady rather than explosive. Such an approach continues into how narratives are framed. Archaeologists present their findings not sensationalized, not exaggerated. The use of language remains measured and exact. Discoveries are presented as pieces within a pattern. Interpreting is guided by calm curiosity. The audience is invited to observe rather than react. In this way, storytelling parallels the idea of slow exposure. History is something to sit with, not hurry through. There is reflection instead of excitement. The mind is allowed to wander gently. This form of storytelling respects both the past and the listener. Quiet attention is fostered. In calmness, understanding is deepened. As this segment comes to rest, the theme remains consistent. Small things don't shout for one's attention. They are patient, waiting to be apprehended. They are met by calm curiosity on equal terms. Together, the moments of the everyday are uncovered sans drama. The Revolutionary War seems less progression of events and more a very long experience. Archaeology can teach us to slow down and look again. Every fragment becomes such a moment of quiet connection. The past is close but unobtrusive. Knowing settles in bit by bit. There's no dramatic denouement, just a relentless clarity. And in that stillness, the story seems somehow whole. Life as an officer in the Continental Army moved at a different tempo from that of the common soldier. Hardship still existed, but it was muted by privilege and position. Officers were expected to carry themselves as gentlemen, even in the most trying circumstances. This expectation colored their daily lives in subtle yet significant respects. Food showed up more consistently on officers' tables. Shelter afforded more protection from weather and hardship. Clothing lasted longer and was mended more fully. The distinctions were never dramatic, yet they were unending. The distinction formed the social architecture of the army. Even in revolution, the hierarchy stayed firmly in place. Generally speaking, officers ate better than enlisted men, though by modern standards their meals were modest. Their food was prepared separately from the common mess when available. Meat was reserved first and foremost for higher ranks. Bread was more likely to be fresh rather than hard or mold-prone. Sometimes officers supplemented rations with private funds. This allowed for a bit of variety in meals. Leadership's social bonds were reinforced through sharing meals. Conversation replaced quiet at the table. Eating became about rest rather than simply survival. A moment that was comforting served to reinforce that authority. Food quietly marked social distance. Shelter further distinguished officers from enlisted soldiers. Officers were more likely to be sleeping in their own tents or sharing quarters with other gentlemen. The shelters were stronger and better placed inside the camps. The canvas was thicker and the floors more common. Officers were less exposed to wet soil and cold winds. They stayed in a house or barn if these were available near where they were fighting. Privacy enabled a chance to rest and ponder things. Letters can be written and plans laid down without interruptions. The shelter area became an outlet for decision-making. Comfort proved to be one way of sustaining leadership. The difference was made each night. The other highly visible marker constituting rank and privilege was clothing. Officers wore tailored coats, finer fabrics, and decorative details even when worn. These garments kept their form and warmth. Boots were heavier and were replaced more often. Buttons, insignia, and sashes signaled authority clearly. Officers could afford repairs or replacements. Clothing was another way to enforce discipline and respect. Appearance was important as part of the tool of command. Immediately, soldiers knew rank by dress. This visual order kept structure intact. Part of leadership identity was clothing. In some instances, there were personal servants or aides available to the officers. These individuals helped with the day-to-day activities that ranged from cleaning to cooking, and even arranging equipment. This freed the officers from much physical activity. Time thus saved could be utilized for planning or even resting. Even little help tended to make the long days more bearable. The attendant arrangement also reflected the social norms of the period. Leadership was associated with delegation rather than labor. Very few enlisted men ever enjoyed such support. These quiet advantages added up over time. Endurance was conserved by gaining help. Authority was bolstered through separation. Financial means also determined the differences in officers' experiences. Officers hailed mostly from wealthier classes. Personal finances made it possible for the officers to order supplies on their own. Extra blankets, superior food rations, and writing materials were commonplace. Such independence decreased the expectation of military supply chains. During shortage situations, officers could remain comfortable. Enlisted soldiers could not. Money brought with it some sense of flexibility and security. These resources tempered uncertainty. It was easier to lead under conditions of economic stability. Social class proved stubbornly persistent in a revolutionary situation. Officers' daily routines moved at a different, quicker pace with heavier demands of responsibility. The mornings included correspondence, planning, and inspection. No heavy physical labor was required. Unlike the duties of an enlisted man, decision-making was the means of exhausting energy. Officers spent their days reading and writing reports and giving orders. Each meal was taken at specific times rather than scrounging for something to eat. Evenings provided the opportunity to converse and reflect. This structure kept minds clear. Routine maintained authority and dignity. A leader needed to always be present. Comfort allowed that calmness. Social contact between officers gave them a separate culture. Discussion topics included politics, tactics, and personal concern. Shared education and background structured communication. Officers insisted on norms of behavior and politeness. Conflicts were resolved by formal means, not by physical means. Prestige was a vital element in this group. Esteem was gained by tact and predictability. Archaeologists studied patterns of coin circulation to understand supply routes. There was money, but it was intermittently unavailable. These artifacts speak to economic uncertainty. Soldiers lived in a liminal state between promise and delay. Payment was more hoped for than received. Coins symbolized patience rather than wealth. Waiting for compensation framed daily life. With time, these archaeological findings integrate into a larger perspective. They confirm written accounts without dramatization. Day-to-day soldier life was repetitive, restrained, and continuous. Objects reveal habits formed through necessity. Archaeology fills the gaps of recorded history. It speaks of survival without a narrative flourish. Each artifact adds a quiet detail to the bigger picture. Collectively, they disclose endurance as a lived experience. The past becomes tangible through simple remnants, and daily life emerges as watchful and regimented. Archaeology lets us hear without interruption. As this section settles, the focus is still on stillness, not spectacle. But people forget, the ground remembers. Buttons, bones, tools, and fragments that tell a story in slow motion. Lives molded by patience and routine are what they describe. Their telling is not hurried by archaeology. It invites observation, not excitement. It is through these finds that everyday soldier life becomes clearer, survival a matter of small decisions, endurance leaving traces, not monuments. Whispers rather than shouts. And then listening quietly, the past rests again. Small artifacts unearthed at Revolutionary War sites seldom trumpet their significance. They appear very ordinary at first glance. One has to pay close attention not to overlook them. Yet these artifacts bear witness to human presence more eloquently than do official records. Broken utensil or worn buckle testifies to use repeatedly over long periods of time. These objects were handled daily, not ceremonially. They stayed close to the body, shaped by habit and necessity. Archaeologists handle them as evidence of routine rather than exception. History slows down through them. Pace of quotidian soldier life becomes visible. Each object tells a story unhurriedly. A simple spoon, either bent or worn thin, has much to say about everyday survival. Metal utensils were scarce and most often shared. Soldiers took great care with their utensils, knowing that replacement was highly unlikely. The wear pattern on a spoon shows repeated use over months and years. A spoon speaks of meals eaten slowly, mostly in silence. It speaks of nourishment rather than enjoyment. Archaeologists have found these utensils right next to fire pits or sleeping areas. Placement itself gives evidence of just how closely associated food and rest were with one another. Even such a modest utensil speaks volumes of routine. The spoon now acts as a marker of endurance. Through it, daily life feels tangible. The most common recovered personal items are clay pipe fragments. These early pipes were fragile and often snapped, breaking into stems and bowls. Smoking represented a brief moment of peacefulness. In otherwise very long days, pipes were shared among all, repaired, and reused until they literally became unusable. Archaeologists find the fragments scattered throughout the camps. Their presence indicates moments of rest rather than celebration. To smoke required stillness, it required patience. It provided a pause within routine. Pipe reflects quiet reflection rather than escape. These fragments accumulate with some slowness in the soil. They mark time passing gently. Remnants of needles and threads witness constant repair. Sewing was not only the domain of specialists. Soldiers learned to do repairs themselves, as that would have been necessary in their lives. Archaeologists find needles near living areas, not workshops. That is believed to be indicative of sewing being able to happen anywhere where there was space to sit and sew. Repair consisted of repeatedly patching one's clothes to extend their use. Self-reliance and patience are the reflections of such small tools. Every stitch meant time invested in order to save comfort. Mending delayed life. It required concentration and repetition. Needles tell stories of caring under constraint. Such quiet skills were essential for survival. Buttons again turned out to be the most personal things. It was a nuisance to lose a button. It happened all the time. Replacing it demanded time and ingenuity. Archaeologists dig up uniform. Buttons of various forms altogether. Mismatched uniforms are confirmed. Some show signs of polishing from being constantly handled. That would suggest nervous habits or moments of idleness. These were touched and fiddled with and replaced. They were acts of recall of order within disordered situations. Each one button clothing against cold and movement. Each object was near the body. It is in these objects that we see both utility and intimacy. Small, yet carrying great meaning. Paper fragments, though not common, provide another personal glimpse. Letters were treasured and kept well. When discovered, the fragments of paper suggest moments of contact. Soldiers who wrote did so laboriously, picking their words with care. Ink stains and folds reveal multiple readings. These papers were carried next to one's body, shielded from weather. Archaeology seldom preserves. Full letters. but traces remain. Even a scrap suggests emotional endurance. Communication was slow and uncertain. Written words bridged long distances. These fragments remind us of waiting. Human connection persisted quietly. Religious tokens and small charms appear occasionally in campsites. These were personal and unofficial objects. Crosses, medallions, or small carved symbols offered reassurance. These tokens were not displayed outwardly. They were kept discreetly on the person. Archaeologists find them near sleeping areas or where, as personal storage within a camp. Faith was exercised with considerable privacy and silence. These things speak of hope, not dogma. They brought solace during equivocal times. These were carried when space was at an especial premium. Such objects betray emotional steadiness. The small symbols help steady the mind. Knife, fragments, and worn blades demonstrate daily utility. Knives were used for eating, repair, and simple tasks. Archaeological wear patterns indicate the implements saw service literally day in and day out. Blades were sharpened time and again until worn thin. A knife exemplified versatility, not armament. It supported survival in many small ways. These tools remain close at hand. Their condition reflects careful maintenance. Loss of a knife created difficulty. These objects tell stories of practicality. Multifunctional tools were the cornerstones of daily life. Children's things are nearly non-existent, reminding us of adult isolation. Camps were places of work and survival. The absence alone becomes instructive. Soldiers lived apart from family life. Archaeologists interpret the absence with care. It is a reflection of emotional distance, not of neglect. Personal things filled a little of this space. Objects substituted for familiarity. Daily life was not different, but neither was it devoid of meaning. Small possessions anchored identity. These things gave continuity. Their presence speaks softly of longing. When coins are found, they are frequently worn smooth. They have passed through many hands before their loss. Such wear is indicative of circulation rather than accumulation. Soldiers spent little money in camps. Themselves, coins represented future use rather than present comfort. Archaeologists study their origins in order to trace movement. Each coin tells a slow story of travel. It connects a distant place through the quiet exchange of objects that remind us of a wider system. Yet in camp, they remain largely unused. In daily life, barter and sharing were more usual. Coins symbolize waiting. Even discarded fragments of glass provide information about quotidian habits. Fragments of bottles indicate pharmaceutical or preserved substances. When it was possible, a piece of glass was used again with care. Fracture indicated loss, not discard. Archaeologists find the locations of glass near medical or cooking areas. This points to careful handling up until failure occurred. These pieces represent fragile resources. One had to be prudent in everyday life. It mattered more to preserve than to have a lot. Objects were important as long as they were usable. Glass fragments indicate an end to usefulness. These remains speak of self-control. To survive, one had to keep waste as low as possible. All of these little things together have a quiet chorus. None of them tell vivid stories on their own. Together, they allow patterns of care, of patience, and of repetition to emerge. Archaeology lets the voices remain hushed. The attention remains on lived experience rather than on events. Everyday life comes into view as painstaking, deliberate. Things fix memory in place and physical form. They make the manner in which soldiers are made do through routine apparent. Survival was played out through an infinity of small actions. These actions left traces rather than records. History weighs lightly in the ground. As this section comes to a close, the refrain is quiet. Little things don't hurry about meaning either. They invite rumination rather than reaction. Each artifact holds time within it. Under meticulous study, these objects return human presence to view. The revolution doesn't appear at all as constant motion, but as long possession. Daily life was engendered by patience and familiarity. These objects witnessed quiet moments. They stayed behind when people moved further. In their silence, they keep on talking. By the time one listens to them, history slows again. In the study of the Revolutionary War through archaeology, curiosity does not rush. There's no hurry to discover secrets or to solve any puzzles dramatically. Instead, the archaeologist watches patterns patiently. Each object is given a chance to tell its story in the stillness of its voice. One is not looking to surprise, one is looking to understand. Small finds are dealt with tenderly, not excitingly. This calmness of approach reflects the lives of the soldiers themselves. Not a minute of their day was spent in continuous action. Most moments passed silently with the rhythm of routine governing them. Calm curiosity respects that rhythm. The past is approached gently, without urgency. Many archaeological sites have little to say at first sight. A meadow is often open, silent, and untouched. Underneath the surface, however, minute remains of human activity are preserved. A couple of nails, pieces of pottery, scraps of metal come into view only gradually. Such discoveries do not immediately give shape to a story. Archaeologists avoid the temptation to jump to an explanation. They document, measure, and compare with patience. Meaning materializes with time through accrual. This approach honors restraint rather than speculation. Calm curiosity tolerates the unknown. It cannot and should not be necessary to be certain of anything all at once. The process itself becomes part of knowing. Under such circumstances, leadership lived with the reality of uncertainty. Survival depended upon flexibility. The management of illness shows how leadership extended beyond strategy. Disease affected soldiers steadily, and often more than combat. Camps were crowded and medical knowledge limited. Leaders encouraged rest and basic sanitation where possible. Isolation of the ill was attempted, though not always effective. Washington monitored outbreaks closely, adjusting plans accordingly. Recovery was slow and uncertain. Even modest improvements in health mattered greatly. Leadership responded with care rather than panic. Patience shaped medical response. Survival depended on calm containment. Leadership also entailed the morale management of very long periods of inactivity. Waiting tried patience more than action. Leaders provided structure through routine and discipline. The daily schedule offered predictability. Drills filled time and reinforced purpose. Even small ceremonies or acknowledgments lifted spirits. Washington understood that boredom could weaken resolve. Calm presence helped stabilize emotion. Reassurance did not require excitement. Leadership relied on consistency. Survival was as much psychological as physical. Financial issues added to further complicate logistics. Funding shortages impacted all levels of the Army's workings. Men were more often unpaid or paid late than they were paid on time. Washington spoke delicately of this, knowing it was a grossly growing frustration. He was candid in speaking, but did not promise what could not be fulfilled. Any leadership demanded credibility over consolation. Distrust would be curbed by transparency. Even when pay was overdue, equity counted. Those in authority recognized hardship, but without embellishment. Patience was a financial virtue. There had to be mutual understanding for survival. Leadership as logistics also meant knowing when to preserve rather than pursue. Washington avoided unnecessary engagement that could drain resources. Retreat was sometimes chosen over confrontation. This decision required restraint and confidence. Critics questioned caution, but leadership remained steady. Preserving the Army ensured long-term viability. Supplies, once lost, were difficult to replace. Each engagement carried hidden logistical costs. Leadership weighed these costs carefully. Patience guided strategic restraint. Survival depended on preservation. Over time, these quiet systems shaped the outcome of the war. The ways in which leadership expressed itself. Through planning, waiting, and adjusting, logistics determined where the Army could move and how long it could stay. Patience allowed systems to function despite constant strain. Survival emerged from accumulation rather than triumph. Each small success reinforced endurance. These efforts rarely appeared dramatic, yet without them, nothing else could succeed. Leadership here was largely invisible. Survival became the ultimate measure. As this segment settles, the pattern becomes clear. The revolution was sustained not by continuous action, but by careful maintenance. The leadership was in the letters written, the supplies tracked, the delays endured. Logistics formed a web that held the army together. Patience allowed that web to stretch without breaking. Survival was won by calm persistence. These quiet efforts shaped history in unannounced ways. The war moved forward slowly, almost silently. In this stillness, endurance prevailed, and leadership found its truest expression. Yet much of what we know about the soldiers of the Revolutionary War does not come from diaries or official reports, but from the ground itself, slowly uncovered by archaeologists. Campsites once thought to be empty fields yield signs of long occupation. Shallow depressions reveal where tents once sat. Beneath the soil lie scattered small pieces of daily life, quiet objects, ordinary and deeply human. Not of victory or defeat, of waiting, of repair, of routine. Archaeology reveals patterns and not moments. It is through these remains that daily soldier life becomes visible once more. The past speaks softly through the objects left behind. Buttons are perhaps the most common artifact found in Revolutionary War camps. Simple, usually made from pewter, brass, or bone. Many are mismatched, indicating incomplete uniforms or a multitude of repairs. A missing button speaks to the long day of wear and movement. It says something, too, about limitations in replacement clothing. Garments were reworn until they could no longer be mended. Archaeologists consider button placement as an insight into uniform differences. Such minor items expose social and logistical differences among units. Officers usually have finer buttons. Enlisted men, plain ones. Class distinctions appear even here. The button becomes an icon of endurance. Fragments of footwear are a common find on excavation sites. Leather soles, buckles, and nails show evidence of constant wear and repair. Shoes were among the most prized possessions that a soldier owned. Many marched barefoot when footwear failed. Archaeological evidence shows repeated patching rather than replacement. Soles were reinforced until they could no longer hold. Washington's concern for shoes is made tangible by such remains. Every fragment speaks of pain and cold and persistence. Footwear determined how far a soldier could travel. These quiet artifacts speak of movement slowed by hardship. Survival depended on something as simple as leather and thread. It is to this fact that archaeology bears witness. Without embroidery, food remains give another dimension to insight into the daily existence of human beings. Animal bones, found mostly cracked, suggest intense utilization for nutritional purposes. When food was in short supply, nothing edible was wasted. The bones were boiled several times over in order to extract as much nourishment as possible from them. Archaeologists find evidence of simple meals, rather than a variety of choices. These remains confirm written accounts of repetitive diets. The soldiers ate what was available, not what was preferred. Storage pits reflect cautious rationing practices. Even discarded food tells the story of planning. Hunger becomes visible through fragments left behind. Meals were functional, not comforting. Survival shaped every bite. Cooking tools found at campsites reveal communal habits. Iron pots, broken utensils, and fire pits come in groups. Soldiers cooked together, sharing scant resources. Fires were central to both warmth and food preparation. The positioning of hearths shows how camps were organized. Archaeologists see patterns that reflect routine more than chaos. Cooking requires patience and coordination. Meals were slow and repetitive. These shared tasks reinforced the community. The facts suggest quiet cooperation rather than disorder. These simple activities made up daily life. Archaeology preserves the rhythm of camp life. Personal items provide some of the most intimate insights. Combs, pipe fragments, and small religious tokens appear occasionally. These items were carried deliberately even when space was limited. They provided comfort in the face of long periods of uncertainty. Broken pipe stem speaks to moments of rest. A comb indicates attention to appearance despite hardship. Religious items speak of quiet faith rather than of ceremony. These items humanize the soldiers beyond their roles. They show individuality within uniformity. Each item points to a routine maintained personally against difficulty. Archaeology captures these small acts of self-preservation. Daily life included moments of normalcy. Musket balls are often scattered across campsites, not just battlefields. Many were dropped rather than fired. This suggests constant handling and preparation rather than combat. Soldiers practice loading and maintenance regularly. Lead fragments also indicate recycling practices. Damaged ammunition was reshaped and reused. Archaeologists study wear patterns to understand training routines. These findings emphasize readiness over engagement. The presence of ammunition in camps reflects anticipation rather than action. Soldiers lived in a state of preparation. Even stillness required alertness. Archaeology records this constant readiness quietly. Daily life balanced calm and caution. Camps' layouts demonstrate the ways in which organization and discipline have been imposed. Tents are lined up in orderly lines rather than being distributed in a helter-skelter fashion. That reflects the emphasis of leadership to structure. Drainage ditches reflect attempts to control water and mud. Waste pits indicate an awareness of sanitation. All these really speak to adaptation rather than comfort. Archaeologists interpret the choices as survival strategies. Camps were designed to survive a legacy of weather and time. All settlements, even temporary ones, tend to follow rules. Order provided stability and uncertainty. Routine and planning dictated daily life. Archaeology seems to confirm this reliance on structure. It is reflected in the leadership that even the ground beneath their feet has been affected. Lost tools like awls, needles, and fragments of knives speak of continuous repair work. Whenever possible, soldiers kept their own equipment. Sewing and mending were daily work. Archaeological finds confirm the thesis of self-sufficiency. These tools were used until they wore out over and over. Repairing lengthened the life of scarce supplies. Again, through these remains is Washington's emphasis on the principle of preservation. It would not be optional. It would be required. These artifacts put patience into practice. Daily life used constant detail. Fix, not replace, was key to survival. It is through archaeology that this quiet labor has been preserved. Another restrained tale is told by coins and tokens discovered in campsites. Many show smooth wear from heavy use. Their scarcity reflects limited opportunities to spend. Soldiers often hoarded coins rather than using them. A number of these were foreign, indicative of complex systems of trade. Letters and messengers flow constantly, each one reviewed with care. Decisions are made with much foresight outside of the battle at hand. Success is measured less in triumphs but in preservation. Each day's steady management reinforces the Army's endurance. Leadership is, in this sense, almost invisible yet profoundly effective. Winter challenges, one after the other, continue to test his patience and strategy. Snow, cold, and sickness stretch every unit in his care. Movements are slow, as their planning needs to take into consideration the hostility of the environment. Washington predictably expects problems before they occur and makes adjustments in marches and allocations accordingly, even when circumstances worsen unexpectedly. His serene approach means that panic does not set in. Soldiers quietly follow, reassured by this resolute presence. Minor successes of getting enough firewood distributed or holding a unit together take on significant proportions. Survival becomes more paramount than glory. To prepare for and pay attention to minute detail, the quiet and unobtrusive effort that it was now became the crucible of leadership effort. Endurance defined not only the physical state of the Army but also its spirit. Washington's correspondence remains the mainstay of his systematic leadership. The letters are written to Congress officers and allies in a very generic and deliberate manner. He balances requests for supplies with explanations of urgent needs. Tone is always respectful. Even when frustration is present, messages arrive late, sometimes incomplete. Yet he continues to write persistently. Every communication reinforces stability and reliability. Even minor clarifications help prevent confusion across vast distances through written words. He guides not only military operations, but morale and trust. The patience required for this correspondence mirrors his broader approach. Leadership extended into the forms of diplomacy marked by quietness shaping the events of war. The training and discipline of the Army stay at the core of Washington's strategy. Repetitive drills, musket practice, and routines of marching consumed most of every day. Soldiers learn little at a time, sometimes requiring several reiterations of instructions. Washington never hurried this process, knowing that with consistency came competence. Each small addition to previous knowledge, though hardly noticeable in days, piled up over weeks. Orders are given quietly and reproofs administered in gentle terms. Mistakes are pointed out and rectified without severity, leading gradually to learning. This investment in the long run paid off when the Army conducted itself in a much more cohesive fashion. Endurance is both physical and mental. In time, Washington's patient methods solidified readiness more than any single battle could. Observation of human nature also informs Washington's leadership. He observes how fatigue, morale, and personal ambition inspire and deter behavior. Officers and soldiers mirror his stability, often calming down by his mere presence. Dissatisfaction is handled in quiet tones. Not as public confrontations, trust was garnered more through steadiness of behavior than by large, dramatic actions. He realizes the speed at which terror and doubt could seize the Army. He does not allow small issues to escalate into major crises by remaining stoic and calm. Every action, however insignificant, is determined by the need for balance with time. He is a normalizing presence. Leadership in this context is less a function of command and more one of influence. Decision-making occurs mostly under conditions of imperfect information. The movements of the enemy, the weather, and local resources are not entirely known. Washington learns to weigh probabilities rather than certainties. Risk is considered carefully, but the avoiding of unnecessary danger, even the smallest decisions such as where to encamp or when to march, have lasting effects. Observation, patience, and foresight greet such decisions. Quick reactions are shunned in favor of considered responses. Soldiers notice his calm judgment and adjust their own expectations. Stability becomes an important component of collective endurance. Leadership, quietly, is measured in steadiness rather than action. The personal stamina demanded of Washington is that demanded of his men. Long days of planning, observation, and writing leave little time for rest. Sleep is brief and often torn by thought or duty. Food and comfort are modest, subsidiary to obligation, yet he keeps on day after day. Setting the example and persistence he insists on from others, fatigue becomes familiar, almost a companion. Even when events deteriorate, the unruffled manner remains the same. Soldiers draw on his steadiness to stay the course. Leadership is by example, not by exhortation. Steady endurance is at least basic to survival and morale, yet the work cadence of Washington, even with the change of seasons, never breaks rhythm, preparation, observation, communication. It is always there. The little victories that are won, the march is completed, the units intact, the rations issued are noted quietly. When there are setbacks, these are met with calmness and corrected for the next time. Day by day, the lesson of patience instead of immediacy is hammered home. Success is endurance, not showy outcome, and slowly the Army learns this rhythm. The men learn to be patient, to learn to endure. The leadership becomes an invisible fiber that keeps the Army together. Washington's quiet war is marked by a discrepancy between the imagined and the real. Those who envision bursting charges and heroic moments, but his reality is very different. Day days filled with waiting, planning, and readjusting. Advancement comes along inches at a time, almost imperceptibly. Small successes build one on top of another to make a foundation for larger results. Even seeming inactivity has its purpose. The steady, unrushed pace of management defines both its leadership and the Army's survival. Calm, patience, and endurance prove stronger than sudden heroism. In this quiet work of management, more than in any single battle, the war was being shaped and won. Victory was in preparation patiently rather than being seized abruptly. At the end of every day, Washington reflects on choices made and work done. He considers what went right, what can be done better, and how the Army has survived. Every evening reinforces the lessons of patience and observation. Small adjustments are noted for the following day. This iterative approach allows continuous improvement without stress or drama. Even setbacks are framed as opportunities for adaptation. Soldiers notice his calm reflection and learn to adopt a similar point of view. Leadership is continuous, unbroken, and quiet. The accumulation of daily effort proves decisive over time. Endurance once again defines success. Much of the American Revolution took place off the battlefield, tucked away in the rhythms that rarely break into popular memory. Here, leadership had less to do with ordering troops in movement, and more with sustaining them in stillness. Supplies materialized neither miraculously nor consistently. Food, clothing, equipment arrived via tenuous networks reaching across vast spaces. The roads were crude, transportation slow, and communication spotty. With each delay came a ripple of consequences throughout the Army. Survival hinged not on heroic decisions alone, but on the hundreds of minor ones made each day. The necessary quality above all others was patience. Leadership, in its quiet act, had become maintenance rather than display. This is the way in which logistics formed the backbone of endurance. The arming of an army was a real, ongoing challenge during the Revolution because geography and want again and again dictated the limits of possibility. Farms couldn't always spare food and transport wagons broke down, weather disrupted movement, turning roads into mud or ice without warning. Washington and his officers tracked supplies carefully, knowing how quickly shortages could appear. Rations were calculated as parsimoniously as possible to extend meager resources. Distribution had to be equitable enough to avoid resentment. Still, hunger remained common. Thus, leadership was a matter of limits accepted, not denied. Patience governed every decision regarding supply. Survival depended on restraint. Clothing shortages epitomize how logistics shaped daily experience. Uniforms were inconsistent, mismatched, or incomplete. Coats, shoes, and blankets wore out faster than they could be replaced. Leaders had to prioritize the essentials because not everyone could be fully equipped in those things. Repairs became common. Soldiers repeatedly patched their clothes. Washington was very cognizant of the state of the clothes and its impact on morale. Even small patches mattered during cold months. A single shipment of shoes may restore mobility and confidence. These were quiet moments of victory. Leadership realized important moments didn't have to be celebrated. Survival was built one delivery at a time. The food supply took equal time and forbearance. Fresh provisions were scarce. They were usually supplemented by and enlarged with preserved and dried goods. The leadership had to plan meals according to what was available rather than by preference. Hunger was managed but never really eradicated. Washington knew that predictability lessened discontent, hence he stressed regularity. It was not an absolute want that was detestable, but sudden privation. Whenever there was an opportunity, foraging augmented rations, though it likewise needed watchful organization. Not all times were the local populations able to support the needs of the Army. Leadership counterbalanced need with self-restraint to avoid friction. Each meal was one of planning and not plenty. Survival depended on frugality. Of all the logistical puzzles of the war, transportation ranked about the highest. Wagons creaked and groaned along well-worn paths, taking days to cover any distance. sometimes with items crucial. For survival, breakdowns were frequent, repairs took time, rivers could be a friend or enemy, depending upon the tide and season. Leaders mapped out routes in advance, taking into account the lay of the land and the time of year. Delays were considered the rule rather than the exception. Washington built margins for uncertainty into every plan. Movement was measured and deliberate to conserve precious resources. The hurried movement of transport usually occasioned greater losses. Patience dictated the rules of logistics. One survived on the basis of properly set timing. Communication was another fragile system vital to leadership. Messages could be sent by horseback, but that often took days or weeks. Information usually arrived incomplete or outdated. Leaders learned to read as much from the gaps in a message as from the words. Orders were crafted in clear terms to minimize confusion. Washington underscored the use of calm tone to uphold confidence. Miscommunication may cause an entire unit to act improperly. Patience was essential to wait for confirmation or response. Moving too quickly risked causing greater harm. He realizes that to tire is to diminish morale and preparedness when he moves. The movement is reasoned and deliberate. There is no rush for dramatic positioning. Preservation still is paramount. Every march is balanced against its cost. Sometimes it proves wiser to stay put. Stillness in this context is strategic. Personal correspondence of Washington reveals his tactful and reserved personality. He writes clearly with restraint, using words carefully. Emotion is evoked but rarely displayed overtly. Concerns are expressed calmly, often as observations rather than complaints. This is a reflection of his style of leadership. He would rather seek cooperation rather than confrontation. Even frustration was always tempered by responsibility. Understanding is built up over time with his letters. Communication becomes a means of leadership. Perception and expectation are shaped. Through writing, the pressure of public opinion remains a silent but enduring companion. Washington is aware that every action is scrutinized, weighed, and judged. Expectations soar, mostly unrealistically so. Success is demanded, failure reproached. He absorbs this pressure without betraying his feelings. Emotional control becomes an aspect of his public persona. It's an image that stabilizes a world gone mad. Through his calmness, he disperses panic elsewhere. His solidity encourages the masses of soldiers and civilians alike. Leadership goes beyond the fighting front. Winter, in addition, brings its own set of challenges and magnifies those that existed previously. Discomfort is heightened by cold. Scarcity becomes more acute. Washington is fully aware that the time will try men's endurance and so plans for it carefully. Shelter, clothes, and food become particularly important. Diseases are spread much more quickly in cramped conditions. Washington still keeps his eyes open even though remedies are sparse. He attends to what can be attended to. Any little thing means a lot during times that are harsh. Winter survival alone became a feat. Through all of this adversity, Washington takes a long view of the war. He does not look for shortcuts. He prepares for sustained effort. It gives a cast to all his decisions. Gains possible in the short term are measured against long-term viability. Risk is managed rather than courted. This looks like caution to some, and it saves the army. In time, endurance itself becomes strategy. The army still exists, and that fact has weight. Continuity proves potent. Washington's leadership style is gradually changing the culture of the army. Impulsiveness gives way to calm. Patience takes over from boastfulness. Soldiers observe this, though at a distance. They learn that survival matters just as much as victory. This lesson shapes their behavior across the ranks. Disciplined service grows quietly, but the example set went through. Washington does not demand admiration. He simply earns respect through consistency. His presence sets the tone for the whole force. As time passes, Washington's quiet war proceeds without clear milestones. There are no dramatic turning points in daily experience. Progress appears only in hindsight. Each preserved day contributes to the whole. Washington keeps his attention fixed on that accumulation. Uncertainty is inherent in command. Calm endurance sees him forward. The war proceeds incrementally, paced by patience. In this steady conduct, leadership finds its strength. Endurance, once more, proves decisive. Rarely are Washington's decisions dramatic. Each holds quiet weight. He weighs necessity against possibility and chooses what will keep the army alive over time. He eschews immediate victories since he realizes how little they would avail. Preservation is the guiding principle. He watches every day that the army stays in being, taking note of its sickness, weariness, and depression. Every slight improvement in supply or rest is a cause for unspoken rejoicing. Success is not about conquest but survival. Even the minor successes make an accumulation to resilience. His attention to detail forms every decision. This slow building of effort is what leadership looks like in practice. Perhaps the clearest test of Washington's endurance is his winter encampments. His soldiers go cold, wet, and scarce with minimal murmurs of complaint. Supplies are thin, he apportions them out as evenly as possible. Firewood is rationed, tents shored up, and clothing carefully patched. Washington shows up among his men, observing silently yet leading more by his presence than by words. He is aware of the psychological value of steadiness. Small acts of care keep morale steady. In and of themselves, these actions are minor, yet they remain in a person's memory. Survival through winter requires calm preparation. Endurance, again, proves crucial. Letters from home come through but slowly, sometimes inaccurately. Washington reads them line by line, noting what is left out almost as much as what is written in. Battles fought and political decisions made remain weeks after their occurrence. He must respond without full understanding himself, and prudence becomes the rule. Rumors spread like wildfire, and Washington must decide between fact and speculation. His calming mind prevents rash decisions. He writes concisely, reinforcing stability across the army. The soldiers and officers alike hearken to his composed tone. Trust grows quietly through consistency. There's so much leadership in steadiness as in command. More often than not, the army requires patience rather than strategy. Soldiers mostly come in with little exposure or none at all to either weapons or formation. Drills are repetitive, at times tedious, but a necessary evil. Washington insists more on routine rather than flair. Practice brings survival, not glory. Day in and day out, formations are repeated, musket drills are performed, commands are followed out in a calm tone. In a few weeks, small improvements build upon one another. Repetition polishes the seams, and discipline comes through gradually. Each measured step enhances readiness. It is upon this slow preparation that victory stands when it eventually comes. Yet another layer of quiet labor is contributed by Washington's correspondence with Congress. Requests for funds, supplies, and reinforcements have to be couched clearly and diplomatically. Responses are spasmodic and sometimes weeks late. He manages frustration without loss of authority. Letters are phrased with as much respect as insistence. Tone becomes as important as content. Patience dictates every exchange. Even when he is ignored, he writes, knowing repeated effort heightens chances of compliance. The machinery of war becomes another field of endurance. Leadership extends from the battlefield into negotiation. Every strategic decision is informed by both opportunity and limitation. He considers terrain, weather, and troop readiness before deciding on movement. He avoids unfettered risk, advances cautiously, and considers even small marches. To him, preparation was more important than impulse. He tries to maintain flexibility and preserve strength at all times. When he has very few alternatives, he always chooses the option that hurts him the least. Each move, each action was to consolidate stability over immediate victory. Thoughtful restraint was what the army survived on. The essence of leadership lay in foresight. Daily camp routines further reinforce endurance and morale. Whenever possible, meals are prepared. Firewood is allocated and clothes mended, tents kept in good repair. Washington watches all this with quiet attention. He realizes that small comforts reinforce unity. These minor recognitions there is little scope for elaborate reward presents is the greater part of any words. Even brief encounters build trust. Repetition and consistency become cornerstones to leadership. And with time, these routines take on a life of their own to form the character of the army. Communication in the army is conscious and unhurried. Orders are given transparently, without flourish. Washington focuses more on comprehension rather than simple compliance. Soldiers are taught slowly, allowing them to make mistakes. When they make mistakes, they are corrected in light ways, never harshly. People learn a little at a time to reinforce the concept of endurance. Confidence grows by repetition rather than by any dramatic achievement. Trust in leadership is fashioned silently. Stability begins to be as important as success. cadence of teaching reflects the cadence of command. Washington's personal endurance parallels the endurance of the army. The weariness mounts, but he is up every morning prepared to carry on. Comfort is sacrificed to duty. Nights are short and more than once fitful. Hours spent in reflection and deliberation. Even the small obstacles are weighed in his mind. He sets the example of persistence to be followed almost instinctively. His silent steadiness is the steady weight of morale. The troops witness this lesson of endurance given mute. The army moves at his pace. Leadership again is patience taking flesh. The war, as lived by Washington, is marked by incremental progress. Great battles are infrequent, and successes are counted by what is preserved rather than conquered. Every modest advancement counts supplies issued, illness contained, troops trailed. Time is an accomplice if treated with consideration. Endurance is fostered in repetition, presence, and calm decision-making. Each day contributes to the total. Washington's quiet war is one of preparation, observation, and patient action. His leadership becomes a study in long-term sustainability, survival. In this context is the most profound achievement. As the war drags on, he becomes aware that observation is much more important than action. Every detail of camp life, supply line, troop movement in and out, nothing is too insignificant because often a small, confined problem ripples outward with serious results. He makes note of fatigued soldiers, lapses in equipment, and insufficiencies in foodstuffs. He watches the morale of his officers and sees to it that discipline is maintained without unnecessary cruelty. The war becomes a background noise, distant and quiet. What is left is the rhythm of daily survival. In that rhythm, you continue. Your focus would gradually narrow away from the common soldier and settle gently on the figure tasked with holding everything together. George Washington did not appear at first as a legend, but as an ordinary man surrounded by uncertainty, waking each day in the arms of an army fragile and incomplete. Supplies were scarce, information was late, expectations were weighty. His role is less about dramatic decisions and more about constant adjustment. Every decision had to balance hope with realism. There was little room for bold gestures. Patience would become his most valuable skill. This was the beginning of a long, quiet fight. Gone are the days of battlefield excitement for Washington, replaced by letters, meetings, and calculations. He reads reports carefully, often noting what is missing as much as what is written. Numbers matter here: food, clothing, ammunition, and men. Shortages define his planning more than abundance ever could. He writes requests which may or may not be fulfilled. Responses arrive slowly, if at all. In the meantime, he must act with what he has. Restraint and judiciousness are required. Leadership here is measured, not forceful. Endurance replaces urgency. The army he leads is far from homogeneous or predictable. Soldiers are from different colonies, bringing dissimilar expectations and habits. The training level highly differs, as does the supply and discipline. Washington must mold these contrasts into something that works. It's a slow, spotty development. Success occurs in inching steps, not giant leaps. There are frequent setbacks and often no clear fixes. He learns that imperfection is part of the bargain in command. Control is never complete. Adaptation becomes crucial. Much of Washington's time is spent thinking ahead, even when circumstances prevent decisive action. He studies terrain, weather, and movement with quiet attention. Maps are examined and re-examined, their details committed to memory. Each location presents both opportunity and risk. He considers not only where to move, but when to wait. Waiting, though frustrating, often proves wiser than action. Preservation of the army takes precedence over quick victories. Survival itself becomes a form of success. This mindset shapes every decision he makes. Communication is also a problem that persists. Messages move slowly, being carried by riders across uncertain roads. Events may be long over when word of them is received. Washington learns to read between the lines of reports. He weighs rumor carefully, separating possibility from probability. Decisions must often be made in the absence of full knowledge. All this uncertainty demands coolness rather than haste. To move too quickly may be more dangerous than to delay. In such matters, Washington's strength lies in his restraint. He controls his reactions as carefully as his plans. Morale weighs heavily on his mind, even though morale is hard to quantify. He watches the mood of the troops around him, weariness and disgruntlement evident. He must balance encouragement with candor. False optimism invites disappointment, whereas too much brutal truth undermines the will. Washington has to pick his words, especially in written orders. Tone matters as much as the words themselves. He recognizes his confidence must be steady without drama. Even his presence conveys reassurance. Consistency becomes a kind of leadership. But Washington's comfort is meager, better than many soldiers. At least sleeping in temporary quarters, most often near the camp. Conditions are modest, shaped as much by movement and necessity. Meals are simple and irregular. Illness and exhaustion affect him as they do others. He carries physical fatigue quietly, rarely drawing attention to it. His focus remains outward on the Army's condition rather than his own. For a man of leadership here, self-denial is required. Personal ease ranks second to responsibility. The pressure of expectation follows upon Washington incessantly. He is conscious that the eyes of many are on his movements. Success and failure are equally magnified by the attention of the public. Consciousness, however, does not translate into melodrama. Rather, it tempers him with caution. He prefers to move steadily with as little drama as possible, risking no gestures. Every action is considered about its long-run consequences. The cassene's fragile in his hands and its future precarious. This feeling tempers his outer coolness into one of constant consideration. Washington's relations with authority are multi-layered and exacting. He takes orders from civilian masters who often know little about what life in the camps is like. Their instructions often run counter to practical realities. He writes back with deeply considered explanations, not defiance. He has to persuade as hard as he commands. Letters now become instruments of leadership, carefully arranged and politely phrased. In them, he forms understanding on another plane than that of the battlefield. Diplomacy becomes as crucial as strategy. This quiet negotiation keeps the effort going. As days turn into weeks, Washington develops a rhythm not unlike that of the Army itself. Repetition marks his work. Read, write, plan, wait. There are few moments of triumph, many of persistence. He learns to gauge success through survival and cohesion. The absence of collapse becomes significant as each intact day becomes a small victory. This frame of view is what keeps him down to earth. Leadership on this front is not about brilliance. It is about continuity. As Washington lives the war, it is a slow and spasmodic thing. Rare are the large movements. Constant are the small adjustments. He accepts the pace unfrustratedly. Urgency gives way to patience. His serenity is a model for those around him. Bit by bit, the attitude provides character to the Army. The endurance is collective, not individual anymore. Washington's quiet war is hewn out in bits. Each day adds to the sum. And when night descends upon his headquarters, Washington does not rest entirely. He studies plans again and weighs possibilities. Sleep is thin, bubbled by concerns over supply and movement. Rest itself is informed by obligation. Still, every morning he rises, prepared to do it some more. This persistence identifies his command more than any one decision. The war is long, and he prepares to meet it that way. Calm, measured, and unyielding, such is the way endurance becomes leadership. As Washington lives through the seasons of war, he becomes conscious of how time shapes events. Progress is sluggish, usually unseen, and seldom rewarding in the living moment. He learns that patience is not a passive condition, but an active and deliberate one. Every delay has a function, even when that function is not apparent. He spends hours upon hours weighing the decision of when not to act. This restraint speaks more to his approach than bold movement ever could. He waits for opportunities rather than tries to force them. Waiting becomes a strategic choice. In this way, time becomes one of his tools. Logistics are always a problem, hanging quietly in the back of Washington's mind like a shadow. Food has to be procured, clothes issued, equipment kept in repair. Of these tasks, none is exciting, yet on them hangs life. Shortages frequently occur with painful reed-grain compromises having to be made. In issuing stores, Washington tempers fair play with need. Somebody goes without something. He has no illusion about this. His desk is cluttered with letters requesting aid. Some are answered, most are not, yet he keeps asking, knowing persistence will tell. The state of the army weighs on Washington's thoughts. He sees fatigue in the movements of the soldiers. Sickness cuts their numbers more surely than battle. Washington does not glorify this misery. He speaks of it little, changing his plans when he can. Sometimes the changes are slight, sometimes they can be only symbolic, but even the gestures are meaningful. A camp visit or a bit of praise now and then keeps morale intact. Presence often counts as much as action. Here, leadership is often only about being seen. It does not need saying. That careful attention has to be given to Washington's relations with his officers, each bringing his personal ambition, regional loyalty, and individual opinion into the discussions. There are disagreements, sometimes silenced, at other times vocal. Washington listens patiently, weighing each view. Decisions are seldom reached impulsively. Authority is exercised calmly, without raised voice or display. This steadiness reduces tension even when consensus is impossible. Over time, officers learn what to expect from him. Predictability fosters trust. Trust becomes essential to cooperation. Information from the enemy is coming in painfully slow and incompletely. Reports filter through distance, rumor, and interpretation. Washington adopts a cautious approach to such reports. He waits for corroboration of one report from another source before forming conclusions. Overreaction could prove disastrous, but underreaction comes with its own risks. A delicate balance this requires at all times. Washington settles into a habit of measured response. He neither dismisses nor elaborates on threats. Rather, he prepares in silence. Preparation becomes his response to uncertainty. Movements of the army are thoughtfully and deliberately planned. To march, coordination is needed, supplies, and propitious conditions. Washington does not squander unnecessary rigors on his troops. Udos by fits, puffed up without ever going deep. Dreams come without clarity, merging at points into your wakefulness. The rest comes fragmentarily, though it does come. Each fragment makes you keep up. Your sense of identity slowly adjusts to this life. You stop thinking of yourself as something separate from the routine. Instead, you become part of it, moving with its pace. Days feel less personal, more collective. What matters is that the camp functions, that everyone endures. Individual ambition fades, replaced by shared necessity. This shift is subtle, happening over weeks rather than moments. You notice it only when you reflect briefly, then let it go. Survival here is communal. You and you're together, quietly. As another day closes, nothing feels resolved, and yet nothing feels urgent either. Camp settles once more into its familiar shape. Fires dim, conversations fade, and bodies find rest where they can. You lie down in practiced movements, knowing what to expect. Fatigue wraps around you gently, easing tension from the day. Tomorrow will likely mirror today in many ways. Thought of this fact brings calm rather than dread. In repetition, you find stability. This steady endurance defines your experience more than any battle could. As the weeks stretch on, the camp is less a place you are in than a condition you live in. You long less for comfort, only for continuity. Mornings merge into mornings with your thoughts putting up very little resistance at all. You wake when everyone else does, more out of habit than resolve. The sounds of the camp are familiar to you by now, reassuringly predictable it seems. Smoke curls up into the sky, boots scuff the earth, and murmured conversations drift by. Nothing startles you anymore, and it is in this lack of surprise that you find your calm. Life shrinks to manageable chunks. It is in this shrinking that your survival resides. Your sense of the world beyond the camp slowly erodes into abstraction. News comes late and incomplete, told by rumor rather than fact. Victories and defeats are remote, all but unimaginable. You hear names of towns and rivers you have never seen. These places exist more as ideas than as destinations. The war becomes less a matter of movement than presence. You are here, and here is where your attention stays. This focus on the immediate dulls worry. To think too far ahead is to invite distraction. Survival happens one day at a time. Daily chores quietly take up time, silently unobtrusive. Fetching water, gathering wood, and cleaning equipment consume large parts of the day. These tasks are easy to do, but they require reliability. You do these things without complaining because they have to be done. With each finished task, a little bit of tidiness gets into camp. Order, even minor, is significant here. It gives shape to time that would otherwise drift aimlessly. You notice how everyone does something to help out. Shared responsibility binds the camp together. No one mentions it aloud, yet everyone knows. The body bears witness to prolonged strain in insidious ways. Muscles ache more slowly these days, no longer inflaming sharply. Fatigue sets in by layers rather than in waves. You move with more care, economizing on energy without deliberately making the decision to. Small efficiencies develop in the ways that you stand and walk and sit. These adaptations lower discomfort a little and so are reinforced. You learn which movements waste strength and which conserve it. This lesson is picked up without fanfare over time. Your body adapts before your mind acknowledges the change. The endurance becomes instinctive. With others, interactions are still low-key and subdued. The friendships develop in silence rather than with excitement. It becomes familiar and comfortable just to sit with someone without talking. Few words are wasted for moments, but absolutely necessary. The conversation, if it occurs, is slow and soft. The laughter occurs. From time to time, short and muffled, disagreement is unheard of and, when it happens, is short-lived. Energy is precious, not to be used in fighting. Peace in the camp is more important than being right. Each day in the evening, the camp shifts subtly in tone. Movement slow, voices soften, and activity gradually dies down. Fires, on the other hand, become the focus of attention, warmth, and light. You sit near them when able, feeling heat reach your hands and face. It's simple warmth, yet meaningful after hours of cold. Shadows dance on the ground, stretching and shrinking with the flames. The day's labor recedes into the background. Evening is a pause rather than an ending. It signals rest without celebration. Come softly, gently cloaking the camp in darkness and silence. There are guards about, treading familiar patterns without fuss or noise. You sleep with practiced ease, adjusting your blanket and gear well enough by habit. It's reassuringly easy to find routine, even here. You drop down, knowing exactly what the ground will be like against you. The chill creeps up slowly as expected. You settle a little and then are still. Sleep creeps up quickly as it doesn't have to hurry. Rest comes when it will. Thoughts drift through your mind, loose and unconnected fragments. Memories rise to the surface and slip away again. Home is far away, but not painful to remember. It is just another life. You don't struggle against this separation. Present is stressful enough. Dreams, when they occur, are faint and unimportant. They break easily in the light of morning. Sleep is not about evasion here, it's about recuperation. It replaces only enough to keep going. As days continue to repeat, you notice how your expectations have changed. You no longer hope for excitement or resolution, but for consistency and stability. Full ration, a dry night, or a quiet day feels like success. These small victories add up amazingly slowly. They shape your experience more than any grand event. You learn to measure progress in comfort rather than conquest. This adjustment happens quietly, sans announcement. It feels natural once it settles in. The absence of constant fighting becomes one of the defining features of your life. You realize that most soldiers spend far more time waiting than engaging. Battles, when they happen, are brief compared with the long stretches between them. This understanding reshapes how you view the war, not a continuous clash, but a long test of patience. It is an endurance rather than courage. To be able to stay present through monotony is to be able to survive. Your endurance embodied simply by continuing. That continuation is its own achievement. As another cycle of days draws to a close, the camp remains largely unchanged. Tents stand where they stood, paths are worn and familiar, people shift slightly, but the structure holds. You recognize this stability as fragile and real. It exists because everyone is maintaining it together. You're a part of that maintenance now. Your presence contributes quietly to the whole. It's a muted sense of purpose. It does not make you excited, but it steadies you. That steadiness is enough. As you lie down once more, you do so without expectation. You know what the night will bring, more or less. Cold, quiet, and intermittent rest await you. This predictability no longer troubles you. Instead, it lets the mind release its hold. The muscles relax to the extent they can. Breath slows as fatigue dictates. You yield to rest without resistance. Tomorrow will come with its own time. For now, around you is silence. What it means, really, to live as a soldier during the American Revolution, not in constant motion or endless battle, but in steady endurance. Days shaped by routine and discomfort and patience, life is reduced to the essentials and repeated. Without any ceremony, you learn to exist within the limitation rather than fight against it. But whether it makes more difference to your experience than orders or plans. On rainy days, the camp is weightier and quieter. Water amasses in every open spot, soaking boots and blankets alike. You walk gingerly, trying not to slip, though mud makes it difficult. Cold rain seeps through clothes and pulls against your skin. It is harder to keep up the fires and smoke clings close to the earth. Buddy talks much during periods of bad weather. Conversation is replaced by endurance. You learn to live with discomfort and not to struggle against it. The more you resist, the more alive the discomfort becomes. Sickness is always there, working its way silently through the camp. One day, a man who stands near you in line coughs more than he normally does. Several days later, he is no longer standing in the line. There's almost no ceremony over these disappearances. A space opens where a person once stood, and life goes on. You know that you're not wasting time thinking about it. You take on the thought of keeping warm and being rested. You will never get enough rest. Sleep is in short segments because of the cold or the noise. Still, you're grateful for it when it comes. Even light sleep offers escape. By night, the camp takes on a more subdued rhythm. Fires are banked low, their light flickering softly against canvas and wood. Voices drop to murmurs, then to silence. Guards take up their positions, pacing along slow, well-known paths. You lie on your blanket, staring briefly into the darkness. Your thoughts drift in and out without direction. Memories rise softly, then fall again. There's no clear line between wakefulness and dreaming. This half-awareness becomes familiar. Fear is present, yet not overwhelming. It's more of a background awareness, much like hunger or cold. You recognize that danger is potential, yet often it doesn't descend without some kind of warning. Most nights are quiet, which further captures the sense of waiting. When distant sounds cut the silence, your body tightens briefly and then relaxes again. Nothing happens and you breathe more easily. Camp remains whole, unchanged. Another night passes without incident. Relief consists not of joy, but of continuation. The way that days accumulate, your sense of time begins to shift. The weeks have been differentiated only by the change of weather or perhaps a change of location. You read time by how worn your boots get, how thin your coat feels. Letters from home are received when they come in and carefully read, often reread. Words from another life feel comforting and distant. You carried them quietly, returning to them during the moments when nothing was really happening. They remind you that there is life besides this camp. That knowledge is sustaining more than rations. As you go about your days, it strikes you how little drama actually characterizes your experience. The war, as you are living it, is primarily one of absences, comfort absented, certainty absented, action absent. It is no easier, only quieter. You learn to accommodate yourself by scaling back your expectations, by narrowing concerns to those of the immediate moment. Stand here, eat this, now sleep. Such simple instructions become your world. In their recursiveness and order, by the time you lie down again, fatigue settles over you like an old blanket. Your body aches in predictable places, shoulders, legs, back. You shift slightly, seeking a position that offers the least discomfort. Around you, the camp breathes softly, a collection of worn bodies in the same space. The day has ended much like it began, with no resolution or climax. Tomorrow promises more of the same. In this steady repetition you endure. This is the quiet reality of being a soldier. As time keeps on passing, you start to notice how routine shapes your thoughts deep inside. Each action follows the last with little variation, creating a steady rhythm you rarely question. You wake, you stand, you wait, and you eat when the food appears. Your body learns what your mind already knows, that resistance wastes energy. Even discomfort becomes predictable, arriving in familiar ways each morning. First comes the cold, then hunger, and finally fatigue. None of it feels dramatic anymore. Instead, it's expected, almost scheduled. This predictability dulls sharp emotions, smoothing them into something quieter. In this manner, the days move gently forward. In waiting, it becomes your major occupation. More hours are taken up in waiting than in actual marching or drilling. You wait for orders that may only come at nightfall. You wait for supplies rumored to be on the road somewhere miles away. You wait for letters, for news, for changes in the weather, for changes in locale. And in those stretches, time stretches thin and wide at the same time. Watch clouds slowly drift across the sky overhead, measuring progress without any sense of urgency. The small movements around the camp take on importance, simply because there is little else to observe. A pot boiling, a fire catching, or a tool being fixed can absorb your attention for long minutes. In waiting, you learn patience not as a virtue, but as survival. The same familiar subjects of conversation come round day after day. Men speak in low tones of where they came from and what they left behind. Farms, shops, families, and ordinary routines are recollected in minute detail. These stories are recounted slowly, without embellishment, as if enjoyment of memory for its own sake. You listen more than you talk, comforted by the sound of familiar voices. The same story is sometimes repeated, told each time in identical form. No one interrupts because repetition is reassuring. Familiar words provide stability in a place without any. In this way, memory becomes shared shelter. It occupies the silence without breaking it. Your clothes wear down steadily, persistently. Sleeves fray, seams loosen, and fabric thins where it rubs against your skin. You patch what you can with coarse thread and needles that must be returned. Repairs are never perfect, but they keep garments serviceable a little longer. Shoes suffer most, bending and cracking under constant strain. When soles thin, you feel the ground more distinctly beneath your feet. Stones, roots, and frozen earth press upward with each step. You grow accustomed to it, adjusting how you walk. Pain becomes another quiet companion, rarely acknowledged aloud. The weather remains an unpredictable force that shapes every day. Cold mornings give way to damp afternoons, and then nights that are longer than they feel like being. When the wind rises, it cuts freely through the camp, finding every opening to seep into. You pull your coat closer over your body, though it resists little. Rain comes with no warning, turning pathways into shallow streams. Toward everything smells of wet earth and smoke. Drying takes time, sometimes never really happening. You learn to accept being damp as part of the experience. Comfort becomes relative, defined by what is a little better than what was. Illness continues its slow passage through the camp, rarely announced and never dramatic. A man coughs persistently, and others will shift away slightly without comment. Fevers come quietly, leaving men weak and unsteady. The ones afflicted rest when they can, lying wrapped in blankets near fires. Recovery is problematic, and it will come gradually if at all. You learn not to ask too many questions. Absence is noticed, rarely discussed, and then there is the opening in lines and formations that will close again. Life keeps going in a way that is steady, subdued. Drills remain simple and repetitive, reinforcing familiarity rather than excitement. Commands are given in an even tone, repeated as necessary. You move when told, stop when told, and wait again. Musket practice emphasizes care rather than speed. Each action is deliberate, measured, and calm. There is little shouting and no sense of urgency. Consistency, not perfection, was the aim. Over time, movements become automatic. Before thoughts fully form, your body has already responded. Thus, effort was reduced and energy was conserved for the long days ahead. Fear emerges periodically, mostly at night or during times of transition. If far-off noise travels farther than expected, causing a surge in alertness, you stop, listen keenly, aware of your surroundings. Most times, nothing follows and tension melts once more. This happens frequently enough to become familiar. Fear here is not constant panic but readiness. It tightens briefly before receding. You learn to live with it without domination. You are calm again quickly when stillness is confirmed. Camp settles again into its quiet rhythm. Meals are few and practical, little in the way of pleasure, but sustenance nonetheless. You learn to eat what is placed before you, lessening your expectations. Taste counts for little compared to texture and amount. Warm food is valued more for its heat than its flavor. Food is eaten slowly with the knowledge that nothing may come afterwards. Sharing is a quiet affair without fanfare. Someone offers a piece of bread or accepts one in return. These small acts knit relationships without words. Hunger persists, but it is shared hunger. That shared experience brings a muted sense of connection. Sleep keeps coming erratically, inducting the dictates of environment rather than intention. You can only lie down after the darkness sets in. It doesn't matter if there is no fatigue. You make careful arrangements with the tarpaulins, but they shift during the night. The sounds of the camp begin to mellow as the voices soften now, and then one stirs or coughs.